Right. Hello, everybody. My name is Erik Schjolberg with EJS Golf, and we are doing the Truth About Golf podcast with Dr. Bull today. Dr. Bull, welcome.
Thank you, Erik. And I know you and I spoke a while ago, so thank you again for the invitation.
Yep.
And such a delight when we spoke. I remember, well, our house was being renovated at the time, and the only room that was somewhat usable was a bedroom, as it became, and it was just full of plaster. And
Yeah.
so it's nice to finally have paint on the walls.
It's awesome.
It was a building site, so it's always a pleasure speaking, Erik, with you. And thanks for the invitation again.
Oh, well, I'm excited always because I learned so much when talking to you always about life, golf. I'd say it's always a true pleasure. So for those of you just tell us a little bit about you for a second. Who is Dr. Bull? What do you do? For those listening that don't know who you are.
Wow, okay, that's a big question.
Yeah, I know. Briefly.
I create. So I work within kind of performance, human performance within golf. So most of my work is around things like obviously within kind of 3D, for example. So looking at the anatomy, physiology, the performance of players, really across those areas. So it's a very big subject in some ways. You look at obviously the biomechanics, the physiology of human movement, the anatomy, for example. How do we improve the performance of players around things like improving their movements, becoming more powerful, pain avoidance, understanding why they do what they do. And that's certainly one of my big real loves, I guess, in some ways, is when you are with players and when you are working alongside the coaches, to really understand why someone does, why are you doing this, is that kind of big question in some ways. So a lot of what I'll do within the sessions with the players is to really establish why they're doing this. So examples may be, Erik, that the player may experience something, the coach may observe something, but through the data we have and through the systems that we use, we can really locate why they do it. And that's the real fun. And that can take us in, so many different areas. They come in looking at this and they kind of walk out understanding that, which is often the basis of movement. What you and I observe over here just connects back to kind of things over there. For those that can see this, for example, that really is my kind of my background, the physiology, the anatomy, the biomechanics, but really looking at why someone does what they do, which is the real, it's not the unknown story in some ways, but you never really know. I mean, I had an example even this morning, someone with a wrist pain in their lead wrist, but it went back to the shape of their right foot. So the shape of their right foot, an example, when they kind of got flat feet, and that kind of very informal definition is called pes planus, when the arch of the foot kind of collapses, and there's many reasons why that can happen. They can be born that way. Shoe design, the surface they stand on for periods of time, their gait cycles, what they do within their training, what they don't do within their training, what they've done through life, what they haven't done through life. All these questions as to why the feet does what it does anyway, because of what the right foot doesn't like doing. They then adapted their lead wrist as a way of moving around the foot. How they adapted the lead wrist then created an issue with their scaphoid, which is the bone, for those that can see around about here. That was a very core story, that to really resolve the wrist issue, we had to look at the right foot and the shape of that foot, and then start to restore its ability to kind of move in the way that, in essence, it was designed to move. And so they're fun stories. That's really kind of what I look at. Player comes in with a question. We look at what they do, how they do it, but really understanding that why is the real fun part of this.
And I think, thank you for there, because that's why I love talking to you. I think it's so you go back to golf I don't know how many years we have to go back before, but it was never that deep. It was a drill for this, a drill for that, and now that people like you, being the specialists like you are, coming in and making golf, for coaches and what you do so much deeper. We look at things way different. And today I was hoping to, and just that example you gave was just awesome. I was hoping to maybe get into some stuff of that instructors see all the time, that trying to get a little deeper into it and how do you look at it. And one of the things I think we notice often is, casting. Golfers casting the golf club a lot. And, when you fix the what we think are the problems, maybe the open face, or the reason they're doing it because the face is so open, or maybe they're not moving towards the target, they're stuck backwards, whatever technical issues we fix. But then sometimes you still see it. And so
Yeah.
hoping to maybe talk to you a little bit, but where do you go when you see things like that, that the person still has that motor pattern, right? That
Yeah.
you're trying to get out and trying to train that out of them, even though you fix the technical issues, let's say, that cause it, you still see it. And
Sorry, Eric, there's a slight delay. So if I cut you off, I apologize.
no, you're good. You're good.
I mean, that's actually a huge, massive question you've asked there. Yep. So to try and give you some answers to a hugely expansive question, and there's other bits that I won't go through today just because it's such a big question. So
yep.
Initially, it's understanding why someone using that very informal definition would cast the club. So that's that kind of bigger question, that typically they're adapting through hand and wrist as a way of moving around a constraint elsewhere. So again, it could be the foot, the hip, the spine, whatever, to give you many examples some examples of many. So they're using their hands and they're adapting the timing of, in essence, when they start to, in that very kind of informal definition, when they start to release or deliver the club, then gets really, too early, gets very disrupted. So that's the bigger question. So rather than trying to understand how do we resolve the cast, should you say, the bigger question to explore is, but why are you having to move that way? So an example would be typically within coaching. So we keep it very much about coaching, as you and I speak. There's two words we can use to really define coaching: the idea of stimulation and inhibition. So, and not all, so I say this in a very fun way. So for those that listen to this, it is meant in a fun way. So please do not see it for anything more than that. Coaches will typically look to stimulate. How do we get rotation? How do we look to get more speed? How do we look to get more vertical force? How do we look to, get more whatever, elevation? These are some, these are some examples of multiple examples in golf. What the nervous system doesn't like is being ambushed with more information. We are already overstimulated as humans. Cell phones, notifications, alerts. Even my wife made a very good point as we were driving recently, that even when we get close to a bush and even the car beeps, there's sensors that stimulation and feedback. Yep. And we are already overstimulated for multiple reasons within our nervous system. So when you stimulate, you need to do more of this, you need to do more of that. That's more load, more ambush, more of an assault in some ways on an already over ambushed nervous system. The bigger question and the better question is to understand, but what's preventing you from doing X? What's preventing you from rotating? What's preventing you from not casting early? What's preventing you from not producing vertical force? So when you release the inhibition, invariably, organically, the player will start to kind of move in a much more advantageous, helpful way. And that's also much better for the nervous system, because true development of players, Eric, is not what can you add on, but actually what can you take away? What can I remove from Erik to actually allow him to evolve and develop and organically grow in some ways, rather than what can I add on to Erik, which is more noise, more distraction, more stimulation, more of an ambush on these already overstimulated humans. So you look at it as an example that how many, I can only give you my experiences, how many players come for sessions with me. It's not that they're not approachable or not coachable. They are so overstimulated. They've been in the office all morning, they've been on their phone for an hour, and they've been on. So they come in for a session, literally kind of the sympathetic nervous system is so overactive, the adrenals are fatigued, all this kind of stuff. So learning is very challenging for them. And why that's so important, why it was such a big question you asked me there, was that within our physiology, there's a very defined order that physiology goes. It goes behaviors, exercise, nutrition, supplementation, followed by an intervention. So it always starts with a behavior. What can I do? What's my involvement? What's my contribution to the problem? What am I doing that's encouraging to keep it on context, the cast of the club? What's my involvement in the club being cast? Okay. So once we've established that, and movement's a form of behavior, once we've established that, we then look at, okay, how can I use exercise and nutrition, for example, to help support and prevent that movement from happening. Then you have to may look at the idea of called supplements. Typically within nutrition, supplements are not replacements. Supplements are there to fill the gaps and not replace poor nutrition. And I say to most people, you can't out supplement poor nutrition, and you can't out train poor behaviors. So it doesn't matter how many supplements you take and how well you train. If your behaviors are still very poor, you'll never win. And then finally, and in some cases, we then need an intervention. Some examples might be orthotics, surgery, that kind of stuff. Now, unfortunately, in the West, we've inverted that. Someone has an issue, we go straight to an intervention. What can I give you to resolve the issue? If that doesn't work, which invariably never does, it start to give you a few things now. To take this pill, take vitamin D, whatever it might be, that kind of stuff. That's not demonizing vitamin D. That's just using that as a very bad example.
Right.
And it's look to train, okay. And then finally, is what do you mean is my problem? What do you mean I'm the issue? Which is often we get with many players, and that's a very Western approach. We've got to get back to the idea of behaviors. What can I do? What's my involvement? How can I use training and nutrition to support this? What can I do to supplement these good behaviors now? Good sleep, good sunlight exposure in the morning, good hydration, all these kind of things we can look at. Reduce cell phone use, all these things we can explore. And then sometimes you need to take something because of the condition you're experiencing. And why that's so important to kind of finally answer that question, you've invariably got kind of two types of people. What are called responders and non-responders. So when you provide feedback to someone, like for example, one player may say, for example, respond to the feedback given around the cast and the club, and another player may not respond. Neither's right or wrong. You get some players, you'll provide feedback in that very intuitive way, very autonomous way. They will just respond to that approach. You provide the same feedback to another player with the same question, they have a very different response. And they often then need a bit of support, the idea of supplementation. So why is that? Again, going back to your question, is that almost all movements are learned behaviors. Certainly as you get more established and more accomplished in golf, rather than say, players which are new to golf, for example, with no real history, then they are in a different place. But certainly many recreational players, many established tour players, for example, you're really trying to pick through and resolve these very dominant learned behaviors, which is very challenging because physiology is behavior driven. And I kind of say to every player, pretty much every session I work with, you really have two choices, Eric, today. We either need to change our behaviors or change our expectations. That's the only choice you have in a session. Unless you're prepared to change your behavior, then you must change your expectations of what you expect to achieve. And that can be, I'd say provocative is the wrong word to use. Some players really respond to that. Yeah, I need to look at this. And some players are not prepared to change their behaviors, but they still want different expectations, which is maybe just the world we live in currently. So you look at it that way, that these casts, as you say, they're learned behaviors. It then connects into not what you practice, but more so how you practice. Even the word practice is problematic. I'd sooner say to someone in a session, what would you like to learn today rather than what would you like to practice today? They're very different to how you frame the session, which is what I do with every player. Hey, Eric, how's things and how can we help and what would you like to learn today? And that takes you in a very different direction and a very different frame of the experience rather than let's go and practice today. Practice invariably means to reinforce what you currently know, which is the complete opposite of what we're trying to achieve in a session, which is disrupt these learned behaviors if they are problematic and unwanted. Rather than, I'd like to learn today about a certain club delivery. I'd like to learn today about how my spine can move in a better way. I'd like to learn today about how speed is produced. So that takes you into a very different type of session rather than, I want to just go to the range and practice. Well, practice what? And you go back to a great book by Daniel Coyle, The Talent Code, and there's another good one, Talent's Overrated by Colvin, and Bounce.
What was that second one? It cut off. What was the second book you said?
One's called Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin, and then
The Talent Code.
Talent Code was Daniel Coyle.
That's a good one.
Talent
Yeah.
Code Jeff Colvin, and then a book called Bounce by Matthew Said. So there was kind of three authors,
Yes.
these very similar anecdotes in every book. And he talked about myelin, which is a chemical that it's when you start to kind of create these new synapses in the brain, these new neural connections in the brain. Synapses are the junctions of the neurons, the nerves in the brain. You produce myelin. Myelin then starts to kind of protect and, loosely speaking, kind of almost insulate that kind of signal. And everyone thought it was a great thing. I'm going to myelinate this new movement I've established. But it did entail, if I can recall those books accurately, if I don't, then I'll be the first to acknowledge and apologize, there's a dark side to myelin. It also protects unwanted movement. It protects poor behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
The nervous system thinks between that's good, that's bad. It just knows movement. Yeah. So it doesn't know right or wrong. That's for you to establish what's right or wrong. So invariably what most people practice on a range, they just reinforce poor behaviors.
Makes sense.
So that's what you said there. So apologies for the slightly kind of long actually a very big question around someone for sure may do this, but it's understanding why they do it, what's it responding to, what's driving the movement, what's preventing them from not doing this is a better question than how do we avoid them doing that, which is a whole different approach. And it's a bit like in some ways you could offer very poor comparables, like saying weight loss. Saying to somebody you need to lose weight will be ever respond. Understanding why they gain weight in the first place is a much better question. And there's an acronym used within the psychology of learning. So I'm absolutely not a psychologist in any way. I mean, I know the best 0.1%. But there's a wonderful acronym called RICE, which is reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. Okay. So when you start to work with players, the order it goes in actually in terms of value is you start initially by understanding their ideologies. What are their true belief systems? What do they really believe in? What are their true values as a human? It then goes next, coercions or shame. What do they get embarrassed about doing? Is an example in golf. You then go to reward. If you do this, you would win money, for example, and then the ego. Their own perception of often how they perceive themselves and how they perceive people perceive them. So what's really helpful when it comes to improvement players is you always start by what's their ideology, what's their belief systems, what are their values, and if you start to then relate those movements to their ideologies, they almost always motivated to improve. Most people go straight to the reward system. That will give you distance. That will achieve you. Within our motivation, that's actually quite low down. I'd give you, Eric, £100 if you reveal to me one of your biggest secrets. No chance.
Yeah.
And that's a reward system. But if I frame it in such a way that connects to your ideology, hey, Eric, you and I were talking off camera about my love of nature and the environment, for example. If you came up, spend a day in the forest exploring, that will really help your spine pain because of the climbing you're doing and being connected to the earth, that kind of stuff. I might start because that's connected to my knowledge. So a lot of our players is really to locate initially what are their ideological values, and if you can start to encourage them to connect what they do to those values, that's a very cool place to be.
That is. I love that. I love asking questions and getting these deep answers. I love it because it is so much bigger, and it is. And as coaches, we know that. So if we kind of flip this around from what you said to, let's go to the golfer then. So as you were talking, we learned a little bit or a lot from what you said with the golfer and their thoughts. So if I'm the golfer, how do I work on changing this mindset of this practice? Or I come in and I want this stuff. What does the golfer need to think? Or how do they change their processes so they can be better when they walk in with any coach to get a lesson and have that frame of mind that's better that you're talking about? Where do they need to change their mindset before they go see a coach?
So I think just the word you've used there is not how do we change the approach, it's how do we improve the approach. So you
Okay.
kind of frame it. So I don't want to change any player. I want to improve them. Change goes both ways. I could change Erik and make him worse. So how you almost that initial way of perceiving the session. Hey, Erik, what would you like to improve today? Yeah, I really want to improve my ability to do X. Great. See, they've already framed it now with the view of improving something rather than what do you want to change today? Well, I don't like the way I rotate. That's a
Right.
whole different. Oh yeah, my force profiles are rubbish, and so you already put them in a position where they don't want they want this rather than yeah, I really want to improve my ability to produce X. I really want to improve this miss, the ability not to hit that miss. So it puts them to a different place. So I'd always say with any players, start with that rather than practice and change. And again, my background is anatomy and physiology, so these are not my errors. This is just my clinical experiences of players now,
Mm-hmm.
rather than my actual kind of my trained background in some ways. So I would always look at it that way. So, for example, then it's more what we'd like to learn today, what would you like to improve today, rather than what we'd like to change in practice today. And then it really goes into you could look at. I kind of use two examples that any player could use, whether you're an open champion or you're a complete new, a new player, or you're an occasional player. Movement's defined by really two words: the idea of need and allow. So an example being casting. So we're keeping on subject today. Because of how you stand, or because of how you move through backswing, it then creates a need to have to move the club that way in transition.
Okay.
But if you stand that way at address and move that way in backswing, and then allows you to move this way in transition. So understand the idea of need and allow. What's creating the need for you to have to release that club or cast it very early? And then what do we need to do in advance that then allows you not to have to move that way in transition? So just start to explore, what would you like to improve today? What would you like to learn today? The need and the allow of movement, and then the idea of kind of what and why in some ways, or how, what, and why. What do you do? How do you do it? Which is kind of often where most coaches spend most of the time around. But it's understanding why I do it. But why are you doing this? And that then really goes into the belief systems. And another big question I always spend time with any player around is understanding their motivation and why they're motivated that way. I give an example. A player I know, plays on the DP World Tour, so a very established player, but he came from a background of not poverty, but real, no wealth, no financial support. He really came from a pretty humble background in life. So money for him is a big driver. So when people say, "Oh, money's not important, you should play for trophies," well, that might be fine if you came from a background of having lots of money. This kid came from a background of no money.
Sure.
He is the provider in his house to his family and his sister. So everything we do with him, I put a pound value on. If you look at kind of gaining 10 yards or the ability to hit those shots, you look at the stats. That's probably worth about £100,000 this year on the DP World Tour. He'll do it.
Yeah.
So
makes sense.
got to look at it then with all these guys. What's their motivation and why they're motivated that way? If you understand that their motivations, their ideologies, the idea of rice again, reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. If you understand what their deep beliefs are, what their motivations are, they can do anything. So really, to answer your question, improve, not change, learn, not practice, need and allow, what and why, for example. And when you start to explore that, you can then really start to make some wonderful advancements around improving these movements that you suggested.
Which is so. How now you're 3D specialist, so you hook everybody up to the you have the markers on it, you get the data and everything we talked about now. How do you tie that in as looking at the numbers, or how do you tie the two together for you? So now you have the data. on
Yeah.
everything. Let's say we're looking at this caster, but then all the other stuff we've talked about. How do you tie the two together then when you are working with a high level player or just any golfer?
That
And how
connects
does that
back to.
help you? I guess that's I guess how does that change or help you?
So I'm slightly kind of I'm very fortunate, but I'm also slightly biased in some ways that any player that comes to see me has a very defined question. I get very few guys come for a session and say, "Mark, what do you reckon?" Just yeah.
Yeah.
They normally, I'm experiencing this. I'd like to achieve that. My wrist is sore, my neck's sore. The ball keeps going left. There's this move I can't kind of move away from. I have certain profiles I'm trying to avoid. So they have a very defined question. So that in many ways provides the context. Without context, there really cannot be a session in some ways. So what I look at is how do we relate the information and connect it to the question? Hey, Erik, how can we help today? What questions would you like to explore? How would you like to use this data today? One of my favorite questions. We have this information. How would you like to use it? I'd like to kind of know about this. So already they've kind of given you the answer in some ways. But okay, so let's start to use the values, the 3D data, as you say, to then start to understand your observations, your experiences, questions you may have, for example. So what you've given the data is real relevance and meaning. And I kind of say this for most people, that the hardware in some ways provides the functionality. The kind of software in some ways kind of gives it credibility, but it's the end user that gives it real value and meaning. And that's what you try and do with the data, that we have this information now. How do we connect it to the question you've asked? Rather than some coming for a session, we get all these values on the screen, as you know, they're meaningless. It's just noise. Again, it's more stimulation than that. They have no meaning, no relevance, no context, no value, because it just numbers on screen. So, have an X amount of rotation doesn't mean anything unless it's aligned to a question. Okay, how does that rotation and connect back to the miss, the pain you're experiencing, the ball flight, the move you're trying to resolve, the profile sort of whatever it might be? That's what we need to do. So that's what I always look at, past experiences. What are you trying to achieve? What's been I had a guy come over from France at the weekend with his coach for a session, and they were great, these guys, very, very cool people, and they had such precise questions. We'd like to know why, and the player goes, I experienced this, and the coach goes, I observed this. Great. Let's use this information now to start to understand why you experience it, why you observe it. And then all the values became very meaningful. Okay, well, that value connects. You can see how that's, I kind of walked them through what the value means. It's kind of relating to this movement. Can you now see how that movement now connects back to those experiences? Yeah, I really get that. Now you're giving it true significance because the player can really relate to it, rather than just say, well, Erik, you only, your pelvis only moves X amount of inches. I don't know, and
Right. Pointless, right? On its own.
Absolutely right. So that's I mean, without context, without true defined meaning, it just devalues. They're just numbers on screen. I mean, you just sort of kind of blindly pick one and go, let's look at, the movement of the rib cage. Why? Because it's the first one I looked at. Yeah, it has no real meaning at all.
Well, I think one of the things too is you look at, and I do in lessons, is some people want, and let's just say I'm using TrackMan and I have all the numbers up. Some people want to look at them all, and I'm wanting to put maybe 3 up there or 1, whatever we're working on. But some people well, they're at the lesson, so they may want to look at them all. But it's like we're really only working on this one thing. Let's not get distracted with all these other numbers that aren't what we're. And most of them, I guess, TrackMan numbers, anyways, are resultant of something else that you're doing. So is it really necessary?
But we can look at that in many ways. I mean, where, again, it's an estimation or prediction, call it what you want, of kind of what's happening through impact, but we need to know why. So why is the club moving that way? Again, what you're experiencing as far as club delivery just goes back as an example to say how you stand at address. So how can we now start to improve the way you stand at address to then start to organically again then start to resolve that kind of club delivery profile you're experiencing? Again, where's the expectation come from? That you need to look at the values. So again, the idea of kind of change your behaviors or change your expectations. you look at, you use the word distraction there. Only you can distract you. You chose to be distracted by X. You can put the same value on the screen for the next guy, never looks at them because he's chosen not to be distracted by the values. So we all have our approaches. One of my, I never tell people I'm capturing the data. They'll go, oh, well, you never told me that. Yes, because it's now truly representative as best it can be, obviously without being in, true learning is only when it's reconnected to nature. So unless it's done truly within the environment of the context you perform within, one could argue it's not true learning. So you try and keep close to that as you can. You never tell guys they're being captured. And when I do tell them I'm capturing them, I'm not sometimes, so they think they're being captured, but I'm not doing it. So really what you want is you want the values to be as representative as they can be to what they experience within the that kind of performance environment. So I rarely show guys data. I show lots of visual based feedback for many reasons. Over half our brain is allocated to vision and movement. So half of the research of our brain is allocated to vision and movement. 80% of our sensory feedback comes from vision. So we are very visual. We observe as humans. You look at how young babies learn. They're kind of watching people around them, and they're observing what they do. The idea of learned behaviors, again, they copy. Kids will never do as you ask, but then rarely do as you do. So the biggest way of influencing your kids is not by asking them to kind of eat more broccoli. Eat it yourself. They will do what you do. I hope, I say to my wife frequently that she will be our daughter's biggest influence because of the female connection. So in my daughter's case, if she sees me train her every morning, she sees me doing certain behaviors, she may not do it, who knows, but you look at all the research around this, they will copy mum and dad. But if I said you need to go to the gym today, why? Because that goes back to the idea of nice, reward, ideology. So she sees the ideology of mum going to the gym and my wife eating certain foods and my wife having, behaviors, for example, in the evening, like no cell phones. She's more likely to copy mum than listen to mum.
Very interesting. I've learned a lot from coaching from you, obviously, but the how you talked about the 50% of what our brain is, through the vision and stuff, it changes just the way I think, and through coaching. I guess I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I have another question. If we can maybe hit one more here, and we see a lot in coaching now, these averages.
Sorry, you and I so we can do a little volume of these, so you can always if you're kind enough to invite me back again, I'd always be more than happy to do as many of these.
I could do a 24-hour podcast with you, Dr. Bull. We could go on for days. I could just sit here and listen to you. I love it. Love learning from you. And it's just so deep. So I feel like we see a lot of stuff in golf going this way now with the data. We see averages, whether you use hack motion, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's just something you put on your wrist and you're looking at pronation, and some other wrist movements, whether you're extending or not. But it's very isolated, right? Just for the wrist. And then, but we get PGA Tour averages, let's say, or let's say you go to, I think Golf Tech has averages, or there's always PGA Tour averages or LPGA averages that people are trying to get to, or say, here's your pelvis movement. You're swaying this much, or this is what PGA Tour averages. Oops, you're in the red. We got to go for this number. So it seems like that's the way things are going because it's popping up more. And I don't know if that's just, it's neat for these companies that put it out to look at that data, but I'd like to hear your opinion on the training of that way.
Well, you've got to look at it first of all. Again, what's the motivation of many of these devices is to sell you something.
Correct.
So you got to start with you got to start with understanding that the motivation behind whatever device is invariably one to make money from you. So I kind of say, don't use technology, don't let technology use you. I use technology, but I'm not used by it, as it can be in many people's life, unfortunately, these days. So going back to kind of the idea of single sensor, it doesn't matter if it's the foot, the wrist, it's irrelevant. You cannot look at any segment independent of the rest. Go back to our story today. The person was experiencing lead wrist pain because of a trail foot issue. So you're looking at just the leaderless independent, the elbow, the shoulder, the scap, the neck, then that's not advisable in any way. You need to look at the whole global human, and that's often how research happens within. I'm just going to plug you in, Eric. So apologies for moving about.
Oh, you're good.
I never charge my phone because it's turned off most of the day for those reasons. And here we go. So if you go to, say, laboratories, often within universities, they invariably design research projects based on what's in the lab. So in my office today, I said, well, like, what's in the lab today? We've got that, and that. I'll create this research based on what's available. And that's how a lot of research is done. They don't go into a lab with a question and then get the resources. They look at what's available, then they create a research proposal based around what's in the laboratory. And I think the idea of average, I mean, who wants to be an average value?
Yeah.
What's it in the US? The average male dies at 74. Do you want to die at 74?
No, right.
Who wants to live average? Who wants to be average?
Right.
Who wants to be so there's the philosophical approach there, but also looking at it then, very few players ever produce an average value. So you look at, say, how these mean values are produced. You could have 4 numbers, 0, 0, 0, 100. The average is 25. But not at one point that number was it produced at any point within that sequence. And that's often what happens with these values. You get they might look at, say, the last 50 players they've captured and take the mean of the last 50 players.
Yeah.
So it's not truly representative of what players have done over the year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, for example. And we can look at, I'll give you another example within physiology that testosterone now within males in particular. So the average value of a 20-year-old now is the same as a 60-year-old in the 1990s.
Oh, wow.
So that's how depleted testosterone has become within males. That, what a 20-year-old has now, which they should be in their kind of peak testosterone levels at kind of 20, is now the same as what a 60-year-old was in the 90s for many, 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 many reasons.
Wow, that's crazy, because that should be almost your peak, around your peak time, right?
These environmental stressors, when I were exposed to, are really disrupt testosterone anyway. So you look at these, even within physiology, these average values now are being shifted so low because all they look at is the last 1,000 people they've tested. So the last 1,000 people they tested produced that value. They're now saying, well, do you know what? Testosterone has to be, I'm not sure the units I'm using in the US, whatever, 500, for example. In the 90s, the average value was 1,000. So you look at average values at so many levels. Who wants to be average? Do you want to be an average player, Eric? You don't do this to be an average coach.
Nope.
Do you want to die the average age? I hope none of us do in a great way. We all way exceed that. Very few players produce the average value. You look at how the average value is collected is often on the last X amount of guys that they've looked at. So I give that no meaning in any way.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at it, because you can have a golfer, and one of the apps I use has those numbers, and you could have it gives you green, right? If you're in that number, green, 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 and then there's this red, and then green, green, green. But they hit a great shot, right? Or they're doing excellent at whatever you guys are working on, but they have this red value, and they may not like it because it's red, but everything else is good. They're hitting the ball great. So it's always interesting with that.
And you look at that. I mean, the player decides that the values are good, not the system.
Yeah.
So, an example, when the player's moving well, when they're very autonomous, when they're adaptable, when they're pain-free, when they can relate to what they're trying to achieve, when they win, for example, those are good values. You've probably speak about this in the past, the idea of de-skilling, as I call it. Often the data gets better, but the player gets worse because you've taken them so far away from those inherent values that you have. So if you push, let's just give some crude examples. I'm thinking this very quickly now. Guys that are, everybody's a sample of one, but are quite notable. Bryson DeChambeau, Scotty Scheffler, players that visually appear to be don't align often with many of these expectations now you see, say, for example, within certain formats. And I'm sure we could think of many other players over years that have just kind of done it their way. If you took all those players and put them into these average values, you probably destroy all of you. So you de-skill them because the data got better. The system defined what good was, not the player. But they got worse. They couldn't just perform that way. So that's where it goes back to context, understanding the question, understanding the history, why you're here, how can we help, what you're trying to achieve today, what would you like to learn. It really threads nicely back to the start of this discussion today. That's what gives the data value. So and you kind of look at the needle's always doing this. You know, what values need turning down, what values need turning up. How do we get that lovely homeostasis within movement in some ways, the lovely balance with movement in some ways, so that player can perform? And that's a real big one for me. And a friend of mine explains it very well. Very good PGA Tour player, major winner. And he taught me this. And we were doing a session a couple of years ago, if I remember that correctly. I don't know why acupuncture came up. So you've got all these kind of, 30, 40 meridians within the body, these acupuncture pressure points. And he goes, but if you only have one needle that day, where would you put that one needle?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
So if you improve one value today, which value would be most valuable? Which value provides the most value as far as then really improving performance? If you've got one needle, where would you stick it within the acupuncture meridians within the body to really then evoke the response you're looking for? So what's, like I say to most guys, what's the one needle today? What's that one do well to win the Open, to win, the university championships, to win your club competition, whatever it might be? So I look at that a lot with players, that kind of one needle approach.
I think that's a great way to look at it. I love that. That's a great thought. I feel like it's, one of the things too is, this is, Hugh Marr and I talk a lot about this, but thinking of just kind of that one needle, how we talk so much about impact, right? Because look at all these other things that people want to talk about, or they don't like in a video of their swing or something, but yet impact is improved and it looks really good and ball flight is good, right? So, but yet maybe unhappy with the video. And I feel like I hear that a lot in lessons. You improve the impact, you improve the flight, everything looks good, but yet they look at the video and see something that makes them sick, that they don't like looking at. But yet the ball flight is good, impact is good, things that they would have taken, before they walked in, or would take, any day, but yet don't like the video.
Then you go back to the idea of RICE: reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. So you may have incentivized a reward there, which is kind of number 3 on the list of motivation, but it doesn't match their ideology.
Yeah.
So there's a disconnection. Okay, they see there's an improvement in the ball flight and they see it's a better connection, but their belief systems and their ideologies are connected to how it looks.
Yeah. Needs some change.
There can be a separation. So everything you do must connect back to what are their deep beliefs. And you can look at it in a fun way. There's almost like 3 lives we have. We have our public life, our private lives, and our secret lives. Most people live within their secret lives every day. Even people within our private life often don't know our secret lives. And so you can be very mindful of this stuff with players. So what are their deep beliefs and ideologies? That's what you relate everything you do to those belief systems, not improved outcomes, improved performance. I've had many guys